deep in the heart of Texas.
We're in the business of winning.
Don't bet against me.
I don't bet anyway.
Lose your life.
All right, I wanted to do a Mavs season in review video and a finals preview video. Sorry I haven't been making more videos. I'll try to make more coming up. Just been busy. Not quite in the mood, right? It's on me, but try to get back to it. So that being said, I have watched every game, and I tried to make a video of this, and it ran way too long, so I need to be succinct. The way I'm going to frame this video is there are three people I mainly want to focus on, and it's, you know, someone that I've kind of been right on, someone I've been wrong on, and then someone I've been kind of more in between on. But they all sort of are going to be part of, mainly, I guess you could say in the end I was right with what I think this team needed, or one of the big things Dallas needed to do, right? And we'll kind of talk about this era of Luka with Dirk and some things like that, right? But I guess the first one I was wrong on is Jason Kidd, right? Now, my critique and my analysis of Jason Kidd, I still believe in and adhere to, right? That is, I'm not sure he's the greatest, X's and O's, draw up a play in a situation, scheme for shot selection through multiple ripples or angles, or a little bit more complex system. Guys need to be in the right place at the right time, kind of thing. I still don't think he's the best at that, but I'm reminded of Phil Jackson, right? And the triangle offense was great and all, but what Phil Jackson was ultimately known for, what he should get credit for, is managing egos, right? That's largely a lot of what the NBA is, whether you like it or not. And Kid has been managing egos, better than anyone this year, at least in the last couple years, right? Even when the Mavericks lost last year, they didn't make it to the playoffs. There wasn't this sense of like total doom and gloom, right? It seemed as if they knew that maybe things had not gone their way, but it wasn't necessarily because they were not up to the task or capable of making the playoffs, right? Or making a run, as we see this year. And so getting Luka seems happy. Look, Rick Carlisle, this is all going to be one big, I'll try to keep as coherent as possible, right? Rick Carlisle's a bit of an old school coach, right? And sometimes that rubs superstars the wrong way. And unfortunately, superstars are ultimately what wins you rings at the end of the day if you're a GM or an owner or a franchise, right? And unfortunately, I think Rick Carlisle maybe rubbed some guys the wrong way. He wasn't an attractive coach to come play for, which free agency attraction is really the moral of the story with this video that ultimately I'm trying to make. And look, Jason Kidd, Kyrie probably likes playing for Jason Kidd. The guys seem to like playing for Jason Kidd. So whatever my critiques may be, it doesn't really matter, right? Guys seem to be buying in that on a pro level, right? Yes, in high school and college, but on a pro level, that's the hardest thing to do, I think, is getting guys who make millions and millions and millions of dollars and are seen as rock stars, essentially, depending, and they're celebrities and all of these things, right? It is hard to get them to buy into, sacrificing their ego or getting them to do something they may not want to do or don't like doing, but it's to the benefit of the team, right? I think on a pro level, that's maybe the hardest thing to do, right? And again, it kind of goes with managing egos, getting guys to buy in. But whatever my critiques may be of Jason Kidd in terms of the X's and O's on the chalkboard and his schemes and his situational awareness at times, right? His timeout calling has gotten way better this year. So someone must have addressed that to him. I've seen much better play sets and different looks and different things that they do on offense. I've seen much more improvement on that as well. So he's done things better, and it doesn't really matter what I say if we're winning and guys are buying in, right? So that's one thing I was wrong on, right? And so again, I still stand by my critiques per se, but at this point, what I have doubted him on is outweighing what I may be right about, if that makes sense, right? The team is humming right now, and egos seem to be okay. Guys are buying in and playing their role to a T. Everyone seemed, Maps have been very good and in late game situations throughout the regular season and the playoffs. They've been among the best. That's a big credit to Jason Kidd, I think, right? So that's one thing I've been wrong on. Now, one thing I was right about, and then one thing I was sort of wrong at first, but quickly came around, right? It was a bit of both, right? And before I get to the next two guys to summarize what kind of this last season has become, right? The Mavs have gone through a sort of roster revolution here a couple times, it feels like, in the last couple years, right? And ultimately, what we've seen happen the last year or two is one of the things the Mavericks front organization has always been a little underwhelming in is contract and roster building management and free agency, right? They've made some good picks in the draft. I think on draft day they tend to scout and pick pretty well. So drafting I don't think is really a concern I've ever had, but the Mavs have just never been a free agency destination. Even in Dirk's era, it just never was a thing, right? And we've always struggled with that. Think about the DeAndre Jordan debacle, right? Where he essentially was going to come to Dallas, and he backed out last second because Chris Paul and the Clipper guys locked him in a room essentially and made him re-sign with the Clippers after he had essentially promised, or it was rumored he had agreed to essentially come and be on the Mavs. And the Mavs have just never been able to make a splash in the right ways, right? Think about how we got Nash. That was I believe, in a bit of a draft day trade kind of thing. They hit with Dirk. They hit with Luka. They've made some good hits, right? But they've always seemed to miss the mark on free agency, and a lot of that I think is, and this goes back to like the roster mismanagement. When you don't get the one or two guy that you want, the first or second choice, you end up overpaying for the third and fourth and fifth choice, right? Because in a way, you got to spend money. You got to be somewhat competitive. You want to keep Dirk and others happy, right? And you are good enough with a guy like that the floor is already really high, and so you're trying to see how high you can build the ceiling, right? And Mavs have just always been very bad at that, and I'm saying that to get to the next two people, and that is Nico Harrison and Kyrie Irving. Now, the Dirk era in the front office, you could say, was good to great at times. Yes, they ended up winning a ring. Seems like we kind of pulled one out there at the end of Dirk's prime years, right? And so I think that sort of washes away a lot of what it could have been had we not won that ring. There'd be a lot of what ifs and a lot of looking back in retrospect, right? And not in a good way. And so whenever you go from Dirk and the front office was good and they hit Luka and it seems like we got this thing going, I think Mark Cuban, I don't want to say hit the panic button because he doesn't strike me as a guy who panics, but I think when Mark Cuban understood what he had in Luka, I think he knew he could not do the same thing that he did with Dirk with Luka, right? Just trying to get by or something like that. And I think I don't want to say he thought what I'm saying, but I think in some way he knew he had to get some angle to make Dallas a free agency destination, right? And to make it more appealing to players. And this goes back to Rick Carlisle and maybe being a little bit more old school and rubbing star players or younger players in general the wrong way, right? It's a big playbook. He expects a lot out of you, a bit of a hard ass, right? Versus Jason Kidd, right? Who do you think the average kind of young guy out of college, if you had to pick between Rick Carlisle and Jason Kidd, I think it would give Jason Kidd would have a bit of an edge there in terms of who personality they like more and playing for more, right? In high school and college, right, your play sets and all that matter because we're still talking about trying to run a system with semi-young people still learning the game. The talent differential or the ability of one or two guys to take over a game isn't quite what it is in the pros when you reach the best of the best, right? And so I think the play sets matter less in the NBA. Once you get the higher you kind of go, right? The ultimate skill and dominance and best athlete in a way, those guys will kind of decide the outcome of the game, right? More or less, right? And so, you look at something like that. Mark Cuban took a big risk and a big chance of going from a good to great front office with the Nelsons and Rick Carlisle and all of that. And he risked it and he doubled down and he went and got Nico Harrison. And I have to admit, when Nico first came in, I thought this might be a mistake. Like, the grass is not always greener. I thought maybe we had, sacrificed the cow for the milk in a way, if that makes sense. And so I was not a believer at first, but I was all in from day one on Kyrie Irving. I made my first video on Kyrie November 14th, 2022, essentially saying the Mavs would be stupid not to get Kyrie, right? It makes too much sense. And it goes back to being a free agent destination, right? Luka and Dirk are cool, right? And Luka more so than Dirk, I think, in appealing to the other average free agent in NBA. But, is your average NBA free agent like, do they see Dallas and like, oh, me and Dirk are going to be going to the club and things like that? Like, no, that's not how it goes, right? So that's what I mean. Where while Dirk is well respected, he wasn't the most appealing guy. That maybe things are close. You have a salary cap. A couple teams can offer you the same amount, right? Or maybe they're within $1 million or $2 million difference. Other things will motivate you to pick a team, right? And Cuban's done a good job with making the Mavericks more appealing. But I think when he realized what he had in Luka, and Nico Harrison was a big part of that, I think he knew he had to shake it up and make a change, and he took a big risk in doing so, right? And getting Kyrie was a big part of Nico Harrison. I think he had a big part to play in that. He was former Nike, right? And in terms of his possible ties and interests at Nike, I'll quote Shaq, sorry I was not familiar with your game, right? If that was the angle Cuban and Nico were taking with making him part of the front office at the Mavericks, then it's paid off. It's paid off, 10 times over, right? And I guess it's funny because I did not see Nico Harrison playing out the way it has, but in retrospect, I should have been all in on the Nico train, giving the main thing that I wanted, and that is the Mavericks have just tend to never been a free agency destination, right? And getting Kyrie, I knew would change that, right? I thought, here's a time, right? They say when everyone's selling, you should be buying, right? He was seen as damaged goods. People didn't want him. I never really bought into the team killer thoughts. I never saw him as vindictive or evil. Maybe out there, maybe opinionated, but I never saw him as like a cancer or a team killer. I never bought into that. Kooky, weird, opinionated, right? Whatever you want to say about that, sure. But he seemed like he loves the game. He's obviously very skilled. Obviously, he works hard at his game. He's a competitor, right? I remember, again, I have the hot take that I think Kyrie should have won the Finals MVP over LeBron the year they won, or he has as much of a claim to it as LeBron did. I thought mainly for this fact that I thought his defense on Curry was the difference in the series, right? I thought ultimately he essentially for 3 or 4 games limited Curry, and I thought that was the difference, right? So I've always been a big fan of him, in all aspects of the game, essentially. Not necessarily like my favorite player or my boy, but I've always had a good opinion of him from afar, right? Outside looking in, keeping tabs on him. And So I was all in from day one on Kyrie, right? And in retrospect, I should have known that my main complaint was one that Nico could probably address, right? So I've been wrong on Jason Kidd. He's proved me wrong. Nico, I came around as soon as possible, right? We're going to get into a timeline of what I think is important to remember about this year. And I was right on Kyrie from day one, right? So one I was kind of right and wrong, one I was wrong, one I was right. So June 14th, 2022, I do the video on Kyrie saying essentially, yes, we should do this. We should do what it takes. It's essentially on a 1-year deal, right? And I think the plan was to re-sign him. I think those were the rumors, right? That essentially as long as nothing went awry, right, he would re-sign. But that was the thing. Even if it goes totally sideways, it's a 1-year risk, and you clear the books to go sign some free agents, right? So I thought the risk and the reward, I thought made total sense, right? Just do it. Now we gave up DFS and Dinwiddie, right? And I'm a fan of both those guys. But again, something to keep in mind. At the end of the day, you were trying to put the best 5 on the floor. And then maybe the second layer to that is you are trying to find the best 8 players that you can within the salary restrictions, right? That's essentially what your job is in terms of building a team. And so, why yes, it sucked to lose Dinwiddie and Dorian. I just thought that the risk and the reward, and we gave up a first rounder as well and 2 second rounders. And again, you guys, if you know, I think outside of the top 15, draft picks plummet in the NBA, right? They're not worth what you can maybe trade for in terms of a known commodity in the NBA, right? I want the best 5 to 8 players I can find. That's my job, right? So if I can get someone who is known to be a top 8 roster spot kind of player, or even better, a top 5 player, a bona fide starter in the league, then I am more than okay giving up draft picks and guys like a DFS or Dinwiddie, right? Again, you're trying to put the best 5 on the floor, right? So in that retrospect, I think it's fine to give up 2 bench players, maybe quasi starters here and there, right? Depending. Essentially quasi starters for a bona fide all-star or all-star caliber if he's healthy, etc., right? I think it was worth it, correct? So I was all in day one. It's a 1-year experiment. The plan is to re-sign if it goes well. If it goes well with Luka, then the sky's the limit, right? You would think. So I was all in from day one. So then early February, right? He actually ends up signing with the Mavs. And again, the reason why I wanted Kyrie so bad, on the court stuff, an extra ball handler, playmaker to go alongside Luka, obviously makes sense, right? Now you could question: are their styles too similar, or is their ball dominance too similar? How do they make it work? Again, this is where I never saw Kyrie as a team killer, and I think Luka is a team player. I never really. It's not even so much that. Maybe you're right. Maybe their styles do clash, but I trust them to figure it out. I think they're both smart. They both get the game. I think they'll figure it out. They'll know what needs to be done from the other to complement each other, right? And so I think they've done very well. And look, Kyrie so far picking his spots this season in the playoffs has been huge, right? Showing a lot of savviness, like a lot of intuition and a lot of picking your spots, right? Which is huge. And so look, they'll figure it out. That's all I thought, right? I didn't see them as 2 guys who would butt heads. I thought they would figure it out. So I never really had any doubts about that, right? And then again around draft day, and this is where I kind of went from doubtful on Nico or not sure about it to giving him a long leash to being bought all in, right? And essentially on draft night. We signed Seth Curry to 2-year, $4 million deal, right? Pretty cheap. That'll come in. Just keep that in mind. On draft day, right? We did a stream, and I'm on video, on record as such, saying that, and I'll play the video. All I wanted from the Mavs, right? And this goes back to roster construction. As much as Nico has made us a free agent destination, and him landing Kyrie has been huge, has been everything. Again, roster construction is important, right? And I don't know if you guys remember a player named Davis Bertans, but he essentially had a top 3, top 5 worst contract in the league. The Mavs had to eat that from the trying to move off of Porzingis' contract, where they also got Dinwiddie in that trade. The Mavs did. So he had a horrible contract, right? And I said, I really wasn't quite worried about what we did with the draft, although Lively obviously has been an absolute home run. Again, another nod to absolutely crushing that pick. But I said I hope the Mavericks do something to get off of Bertans' contract. That's all I cared about. It's all I wanted. We had to get rid of him. And sure enough, the Mavs traded 2 picks back and got Lively and moved off of Bertans' contract, right?
Yeah, I'm kind of hoping the Mavs trade down and get rid of Bertans. That'd be my ultimate if I could have an early Christmas.
And Dallas is on the clock.
Dude, Grady Dick's still there.
Dude,
Here we go. Trade out of it, Dallas. Please trade out of it.
trading down only 2 spots, like, is that even worth it?
Just depends. Like, if you're trading down, it's more kind of like I think you're trying to move a contract or two, like trade some players. I think so. If this is true, it said Mavericks reportedly have traded the number 10 pick and Davis Bertans to the Thunder. I fucking hope we got rid of him, bro. That frees up a ton of cap space.
An absolute insane that if that wasn't enough, right, to get off, I think it was like $16 million a year for Bertans, which is absolutely ludicrous. To think about him and Tim Hardaway Jr. are essentially kind of making the same money, and think about at least how much Tim Hardaway Jr. plays, and at times will hit some big shots for you, right? Think about paying for Tim Hardaway Jr. versus Bertans, who essentially never played, was hurt, was really nothing more than just a sharpshooter, right? And that was it. And even at that, he was a little too streaky. So we got off of his contract, right? That's huge. And it's something that comes into play later is in with our second pick. We got Omax, which again was a great pick because one thing the Mavs were really bad at was rebounding and interior last year, and they addressed that immediately with Lively and then backed it up again with Omax. I think Omax will be a great defender. We'll see how his offensive game comes along, but I think he's a valuable defender going forward. Might be able to do some things for us. We'll see how he comes along. But getting those 2 guys, and then also Bertans' contract was so bad. If I read this right, I'm not an expert on salary cap numbers in the NBA and how it all works, but essentially Bertans' contract was so bad that I guess with certain ones you can declare some kind of what's the word for it? Like you can just declare that it's a horrible contract, right? And the NBA will essentially give you some kind of like cash back or redemption in a way where you can spend, if it's so bad, you can go spend money to make up for it in a way. It's almost like you declare it as dead weight in a way or something like that. I'm not an expert, right? So I'm paraphrasing in a way. With that, they got Holmes as well from Sacramento, who they traded for the pick with the Omax. And so it's important to remember Seth Curry, right? We got him, signed him for $4 million a year, which we thought was good. And then we also got Holmes as well from Sacramento, right? All really good moves, correct? And then once I became totally bought in is when we got Grant Williams, right? And look, Grant Williams ended up not being didn't end up being the home run I was hoping or thought it could be. Again, I'm not sure if it was still a horrible decision here because again, we parlayed him and Seth Curry that I mentioned a second ago. We parlayed them essentially to get PJ Washington, right? And look, we got Grant. I think he was essentially about, like 13, 14 mil a year. I thought what he was bringing to our team and what we needed, I thought he filled an important role. A little bit of shooting and a bit of a, a bit of an antagonistic guy on defense, a decent defender, right? So I was happy with that move. Again, it didn't work out like we hoped, but that's fine. And I at that point I was very pleased with Nico Harrison. Essentially, I thought, he'd have to mess up multiple times and pretty bad for me to be totally against him again, right? Or on the other side. So then not only that, right, but we get Grant Williams, and then essentially back to back, we had parlayed Seth Curry and Grant Williams to get PJ Washington, which, look, I thought that was a pretty ballsy move, I thought. At the time, looking back, maybe not so much, but essentially you're almost sort of doubling down on a guy you just signed this year. You just signed this year and you're doubling down and you're like cutting bait in a way and you're going to a new fishing spot, right? So not so much that it was a bad move, but optically it definitely didn't look great at the time. I think optically you're like, man, you just got Grant and you're already trading him and Seth and a pick over for PJ Washington, right? Not that PJ isn't a better player, but is he that much of a difference that it is worth this sort of immediate pivot, right? Is he really, is the difference between him and Grant really so different or so great that it's worth the immediate pivot and double investment in terms of what you've already kind of spent on the other things in the pick to essentially you're just kind of just rolling the dice again? It felt like almost, again, not like a panic move, but again, like it feels like the juice is not worth the squeeze here for what you're doing, right? And he absolutely obviously crushed that one too. And again, like once that happened, and then as well with the Gafford signing, remember we got Holmes, who we had, in a way, we almost had to sign Holmes, right, on draft night. We almost had to sign him anyways. We ended up parlaying him and a first round pick that we had received for simply swapping picks with Oklahoma, right? Now, we probably gave up some position with the swap, but the fact we got another whole first round pick out of it, we sent that pick and Holmes over for Gafford, who's been, again, he's like essentially our starting center now. With him and Lively, I think they're essentially a two-headed monster, and Lively closes a lot. But, essentially you're looking at a totally revamped interior based off just a few moves, right? And obviously Derek Jones, right? Derek Jones, who is essentially on the league minimum for like $2.5 million a year. He could have signed for like over $3 million with the Celtics. And again, this where sometimes a little difference is all you need. There had to be something with Derek Jones, right? And Powell also did this. He could have gone for more money to the Rockets, but he decided to stay with the Mavericks as well. I think either last year or the year before. He could have gone for more money to Boston, a bigger market. If you had to look at where they were technically before this year started, you would definitely say Boston had a better chance at winning a ring or getting to at least a conference finals, right? Or making a playoff run for sure, right? There's almost no reason, objectively looking at it, why Derek Jones would sign with Dallas, right? But you would have to say that, look, getting Nico Harrison in here to make the moves that he has done, and possibly the attractiveness of wanting to play for Jason Kidd, and Derek Jones must have looked over at the Mavericks and said, there's something boiling over here, or these guys are making moves, I'm going over here, right? There has to be something to that, right? And so that's just going to wrap up about the season review. Is as much as we could talk about the X's and O's on the court, I think they've done a much better job of reacting to double teams on Luka and where they're kind of expecting the double team to come from. They're getting the ball to the middle of the floor, and obviously Gafford and Lively have been a big part of that. PJ Washington a little bit as well. Obviously the oops to all the guys that Luka and Kyrie are throwing. Like this in the defense as well. PJ, Derek Jones, funneling guys into, Gafford or Lively, Maxey as well when he's healthy, still has been doing a decent job on defense, right? Luka, again, I feel also vindicated in my saying Luka's way overhated on the defensive end. I'm not saying he's going to put clamps on you or he's a stopper. But look, if Luka was really as bad as they say he was, they'd be headhunting him every game. But they did it a little bit in the Clippers series when he was not at his best. His knee was definitely bothering him a little bit. And there were also times there where I think he had 4 or 5 fouls where he was kind of limited in what he could do. But look, I've been on it from day one. When Luka wants to, he's a good defender. He's an average to above average defender. And with that, given what he gives you on the offensive end, it's a pretty powerful thing, right? And so I feel vindicated on that. I feel vindicated on the Kyrie Irving thing. Lively has totally... look, I like the pick simply just because they immediately addressed our biggest need on the interior with rebounding and rim protection. So just because of that, I like the pick. But I never, ever thought Lively would be this good and this composed and cerebral with how he's been playing. Like, it's been incredible to watch, right? So... and look, everyone's coming back next year except for possibly Exum. Jones, I'm sure we will do whatever we can to re-sign. Mavericks, I think, have a clause or a rule where essentially the day after the last finals game, they get a period to talk to him before anyone else. And look, I know I'm asking for a lot, but if we can move off Tim Hardaway's contract, one of the things I had said at the beginning of the year is that Tim Hardaway will actually be who I am maybe most interested in watching for the sole reason of being trade bait. And all of that was doing really well until we got to the playoffs and Tim Hardaway just absolutely crapped the bed, right? Tim Hardaway was a possible 6-man candidate, I think, at the beginning of the year, right? If you remember, right? So I thought, man, this is great. Like, Tim Hardaway's, hitting some shots for us. I thought it's not that Tim Hardaway's not a good player, but his contract he's essentially, I think, our 3rd highest paid player or something like that, a little bit more than PJ. And so he's just not worth the contract, right? So I wanted him to come in and do well off the bench, maybe a semi-start here or there, just depending. But not that with so many guards that we have playing behind Luka and Kyrie is pretty hard, but all of that was coming to fruition, and I thought, great, like, we're gonna be able to move Hardaway for some decent value, maybe on draft night or something, and then he's just absolutely shit the bed in the playoffs. I don't even know what's going on. He shot a few shots that were like 5 feet from the basket, like off to the right or left. It was insane, right? Someone who I've always kind of low key cheered for, right? I love watching him. He is just absolutely unconscious when he shoots. He's just letting it fly, which can drive you nuts sometimes, but it's also incredible when he hits 3 in a row or something, right? And so I thought, man, this is perfect. And then this playoffs, man, his stock has plummeted, right? Unfortunately for us. So we'll see what happens, but I think they're going to have to move off Tim Hardaway's contract somehow, some way on draft night or something, and they'll use that to re-sign Jones. Exum might be gone. They just re-signed Green. So look, essentially everyone's coming back, right? And the salary cap, I believe, is going up over the next few years. So that will also give us a little more wiggle room to decide what to do with or who needs to go and stay, right? So I think not only are the Mavs, look, the Kyrie move, I'm just going to pat myself on the back again, right? The Kyrie move and that domino was everything. And I should have, in retrospect, given Nico Harrison more credit because I was a little iffy at first. I thought this might be a little too risky. But in retrospect, that was the right move. And then the first domino of Kyrie has been everything. I think it's been all downhill from there, right? And say what you want about them possibly tanking last year or if guys were just hurt. But that has absolutely snowballed into a very fortunate series of events for the Mavs as well, right? However you want to say it's luck or skill or both. Few things that have trickled from there have been uh, absolutely monumental, right? Can't express how important they've been. So that's just kind of the year in review, right? I wanted to take a step back and start before the year, the end of the playoffs last year with draft night and some of the moves we've made. And Nico Harrison really deserves a lot of credit, and Cuban deserves a lot of credit for taking that risk and making that pivot. That could not have been a hard or an easy thing to do, right? The Nelsons and Carlisle, we're talking about people who've won championships and have been fairly spot on with their assessments and their scouting and their decisions and their input. And they had built, pretty incredible thing there in Dallas, a very respectable organization, right? Good front office, right? But, Cuban took a risk to mix it up a little bit at the very least, and he was spot on, right? So again, Dallas's biggest weakness in terms of not being able to maybe take advantage of some opportunities there in Dirk's career is making splashes in free agents, and I think sometimes that snowballed into bad roster construction at times, right? That's my opinion, right? And I think a lot of things have happened here in the last year or two where I'm going to tell you, like a year or two ago, the Mavericks roster and their salaries were just, it was hard to look at and say, what do we do here? And the only thing we could do was like, we just have to cut off our foot from the bear trap, not to be too explicit, and we have to get rid of Bertans somehow, right? And they did it, some other things, right? And they have just totally 180'd in a couple years, the two biggest flaws I thought that they had, right? I think Cuban's probably fun to play for if you're a player for the most part. Dallas isn't the worst city, maybe not the best, but, it's okay. The sales tax and whatnot's probably pretty nice, the income tax and whatnot, right? There's some, you can make different arguments here and there, but the Mavericks were just not a free agent destination, right? They just weren't. And it's hard to explain and say why, but, I think they were just maybe a little too robotic, right, at times. And I think Cuban knew some things needed to change. So that's where it all thinks it starts, right? So that's it for my season in review. We could talk about stats and all that, but really it's just the changing of the culture with making Dallas a free agent target. And I think Kyrie essentially was the beginning of that. And I think a lot of these other things have fallen because of Nico Harrison. He has been pulling the strings. And I think ultimately he needs to be getting the most credit right now. In all, outside of Luka and the guys actually putting the ball in the hole on the floor, right? But in terms of masterminding this thing, Nico Harrison, I think, is not getting his due, right? And I say that with humility that I doubted him at first. I came around as quick as I could. Trust me. Like, he made a few moves, and I said, okay, look, when it comes to the salary cap, right? If you're in a salary cap type league and you're not like in something like the MLB, you have to take some risk here and there, and it can be frustrating because a lot of times they don't pay off, right? And so I think Nico knows how to play the game. It's so much more about networking and egos in the NBA than it is about the Rick Carlisles and the X's and O's of the world. And it kills me to say that, right? But that's just is what it is, right? This is not high school. This is the NBA. Managing egos is huge. And Jason Kidd, Nico Harrison have done a great job, I think, of instead of fighting that, embracing it. And as much as they've, what they're doing on the court is great, the moves they made, but the roster right now, if we can move Tim Hardaway Jr., this roster might be here. The 8 or 9 guys on this roster might be here for another 2, 3, 4, possibly 5 years, if depending on what happens, right? So I don't want to say, look, they did really good this year, it's going to keep happening, but this team essentially will be here next year, no doubt. And I think this team is deep. I think they're flexible. There's a lot they can do. They're good defensively. This defensive squad we've seen towards the end of the year, into the playoffs, that's who they are now, right? PJ Washington and his length and what he can do as an athlete compared to Grant Williams has been huge, right? Like it's that doubling down was massive, right? So that's just the season. Let's talk about the finals, right? Outside looking in, right? So even if I'm not a Mavs fan, I feel like there's a lot of good storylines with this finals. And look, I think obviously, right, you're talking about a historic franchise in Boston. I think they're trying to get one up on LA if they win. And Tatum and Brown have been around for a while, and they need to win one bad, right, to prove their worth or validate what they've done. And there's always been some comparisons between Tatum and Luka, which I've always not liked personally, and I really hope Luka shuts them up. But again, you have Luka coming in who's almost like the Tatum from 3 or 4 years ago, right? In a way where, he's the new kid in town. And what I'm trying to say with the Luka Tatum thing is, like, I think a lot of people in the NBA and fans, they do have this tendency to say, like, you have to wait your turn, right? And I just feel like that thinking feels like it works against the Mavericks here. And I think for that reason, a lot of people are just knee-jerking to pick Boston as if, like, it's Boston's time, right? You can throw all that out the window, in my opinion, in a one-series game, right? And I think the Luka Tatum comparisons are interesting. Obviously, Kyrie coming back to Boston's a big one. That's probably the biggest one overall. I'm not going to pay much attention to it. I think Boston's making a mistake by poking that bear, because let's say Boston wins the first 2 games, right? And Boston goes really hard at Kyrie. That same energy is going to be given back to Boston and Dallas, correct? And I just don't think again, I say this a lot, I just don't think that juice is worth the squeeze. However, if you come at Kyrie and he goes off and Dallas takes 1 game, like that is, in my opinion, that is like totally momentum series changing stuff, right? So it will be interesting to see how Kyrie reacts to that, or the Mavericks in general. I think, again, I don't think the Kristaps Porzingis thing is that big of a deal. People are trying to act like there's a lot of animosity there. I don't believe that. I don't think there really is. Again, I'm not saying they love each other or anything, right? Or they call each other on the phone once a week, but I don't think there's really like animosity there with Kristaps and Dallas. So I don't really think that one is as big as possible. Speaking of Kristaps, I actually lean the other way. I think the time off has helped Dallas more than Boston, right? Kristaps was going to come back no matter what, right? The game 1 of the finals is what it is. It was never going to change. It was set in stone. So he was going to come back whether he was going to come back or not. Dallas has been very fortunate to finish off their opponents as fast as they have through the West compared to what Boston has done in the East. They're very fortunate, and I think it's a huge deal that they won the night after Boston closed out their series, that they got a full week's rest. And with Lively's neck injury, Luka's got a little bit of a bum knee, which apparently he said the time off hasn't really helped or hurt, which is fine with me. If we get Luka playing like he has the last couple series, we'll be all right. But I think the time off, look, of the stars on either team, Kyrie's the oldest. I think that helps him a little bit. And the thing with Kristaps is our entire team is playing essentially their best basketball right now, and we're getting some time off. I think that transition is easier than Kristaps, who's been out for a while, coming back into a game 1 of the finals. That's not an easy task, right? To just pick it up and be expected to play at a somewhat all-star caliber level like Kristaps might be expected to, right? He has a bad game. He hesitates here or there. Is not shooting well, and he's playing significant minutes. That might cost Boston game 1 or 2 in all reality, right? So it will be interesting to see how they use him. If he will be a bit of a decoy maybe to get his feet wet in the first game or 2, or maybe through the first couple quarters. But if he's coming out and playing significant minutes and they're just saying roll the ball out there and let Kristaps play like he was at 100% at certain times during the season, I don't know if that's very smart, because I think if he does have a bad game, which is, I'm not going to say is likely, but it's not likely he's going to go off either, I don't think, right? There will be a bit of an adjustment period, an acclimation, if you will, and I think he could have an off night or make a bad play or two in a significant spot from being a little rusty or just not game ready in a way, game speed ready, right? Or making that adjustment. It could end up costing Boston a game or two at home, right? And that's huge. So I think that the time off has actually helped us more, because the time off was what it was for Kristaps, right? The date was the date, no matter what we did, right? So for Dallas to finish as soon as they did was huge, right? I would have liked to seen them finish off Minnesota before Boston beat Indiana, but one day later, right? Not a big deal. That's not going to be a difference maker, right? But getting a whole week off for Dallas, I think, was huge. You know, again, Lively's neck, Kyrie's a little older than the rest of them in terms of the stars. You know, Luka's knee, Luka's ankle, Maxi's shoulder, right? Derek Jones even seemed to kind of get hit in the groin area a few times in a couple of the series, right? So I think the Mavs are a little more banged up and could use the rest than what Boston might get out of it, right? The spread is like 6.5. I think that's way too much. I think it's going to be a close game either way. Look, I don't think Boston. I think Dallas is going to take game one. I honestly do. I think Mavs win in 5 or 6. I think that Dallas comes out sharper game one, and I don't want to say like blow away, but I do think Dallas comes out with a little bit more of a sense of urgency than Boston. Now, Boston might come back and win, but I think game one, I do think Dallas comes out. And the thing is, like, Dallas actually has been known to get out to some bad starts in all reality. But I think they come out and, again, just playing in the moment. Someone, I can't remember where I heard it, but someone had a great point about how I think Boston feels, because I know this feeling. And that is, Boston is almost as worried about losing, I think, because they have been there. They have lost. They have had this core group of guys, at least these two all-stars, all-star caliber players, right? They've had them for, I think, like 7 years now or something. And there's definitely got to be a sense of like, man, these guys might never win one, right? And in my opinion, I think there is a weight of a worry that Boston will lose as much as they are confident they will win. And one thing about this Dallas team, in a way, is it does feel like house money. Like, they're not supposed to be here in a way. And that's a dangerous mentality to play against. A arguably equally talented or you know, good team, right? For the most part. Maybe, you know, you could say Boston's has a better team, right? But Dallas is no slouch. And, you know, it does feel like Dallas is playing like they have nothing to lose. And with someone as good as Dallas playing like that, I think that is a dangerous thing to go up against, right? Dallas is going to go out there and let it hang in game 1 and 2. And they're going to say, let the chips where they fall where they may. And where that can hurt you at times if you're playing against someone who's composed and will pick you apart through your sort of lack of caring in a way, right? If you're going to go out there and play that loose. But I think that Boston will be a little tight, in my opinion. I think Dallas will be a little more loose, right? And as they feel each other out, I think Dallas is going to play much more aggressive to the hole, attacking the hole, than Boston will. And I think that will set the tone. I think Dallas will, because of that, get away with a few more calls here and there. I think it feels to me lately the refs are letting players be a little more aggressive throughout the game, and they are kind of picking their spots to make calls, right? I don't know how to explain that per se. That might be me in a tinfoil hat, but I think there is an advantage to being aggressive, and I think Dallas, with the way they tend to attack the hole more than I feel the Celtics will, I think that is a favor for Dallas. I also think what Dallas does that they weren't able to do last year, and what really makes them different in the last half of the season here after they made a couple of those moves, is they are running teams off the 3-point line, and they are making you settle for the long two, right? And they are funneling you to guys like Lively and Gafford, maybe mix in a Maxey. He might have to guard Kristaps a little bit, but they're funneling you to guys even like a Derek Jones or PJ Washington, guys who are really long, athletic, can move side to side, and they're funneling you for a hard layup or shot at the rim, right? And I just think Boston, if they struggle with hitting some threes any given night, I just think they're cooked. I think they will have some nights like that. They may have some nights where they go off and they win a game or two here, right? But I honestly look at the matchups, and I also think one thing that Boston's going to do is that they're going to do a lot of switching, single man-on-man coverage with Kyrie and Luka. And that's why I think if Dallas, if it does play out like that, which I think a lot of people agree, they will probably just switch and play man-to-man defense on Luka and Kyrie. If the Mavs are preparing for that, and that's what the plan is out the gate, I think Luka goes bonkers in one of those games in Boston, and I think Dallas wins a game in Boston, if that happens, right? If they're getting one-on-one matchups on the pick and roll with Kyrie and Luka, right? I think Boston is going to say, no alley-oops, no, we're going to try to not let the other guys get going from three, try to keep them from, getting easy shots, right? We're going to just let Kyrie and Luka go one-on-one, right? If Luka and Kyrie are able to make them pay, that's kind of what I see happening, right? I think Dallas is able to throw the first punch or counter the first punch from Boston, whatever they're doing. I think Dallas is more adaptable than Boston. I think Dallas can give them more looks. I think they're better in the open court. And this is all, I'm saying all this expecting Kristaps to play, right? If Kristaps doesn't play, and he's actually a decent rim protector when you actually look into it, when he plays and he's out there. But if he's out there, I still think him. I think that we will be able to bully him a little more on the offensive end, and what they want to do is try to pull Kristaps away from the basket with which Gafford and Lively. I'm fine. I'm totally fine. This is why Gafford and Lively, like mobile bigs, are just absolutely priceless. This also means Maxey can probably get some quality minutes if his shoulder's feeling good, and Maxey's a good counter to a guy like Kristaps in terms of a guy coming off the bench who might be able to get some quality minutes against one of their starters. Because if they want to pull out Kristaps, I think that's a great matchup for Maxey. I think he can he can keep up with him around the perimeter, and as long as he's not trying to intentionally search out the down low mismatch with Maxey, I think that one could be some big plays throughout the series as well, right? But as much as they say the Boston Celtics are going to switch with Kyrie and more specifically Luka, I also think the Mavs have a lot of good bodies they can throw at Brown and Tatum, and I think that's the difference. I think Drew Holiday will have a decent series. You got to figure one of those guys will play above their average. I think Drew will. I think we are, look, a guy like Green, I think, is going to be big in the series too when he comes in. He's got to play good defense, be under control, and make good plays, right? So I think his defense will be crucial. I think Kyrie Irving has got to stay out of foul trouble. He's going to want to play hard defense. And while I appreciate that and I think it's important, he's got to be really careful about picking his spots. He can't be getting fouls 50 feet away from the basket, that kind of thing, right? So if he can do that, I think what I maybe am worried about, right, is obviously Celtics hitting threes. I think that's big. But I do worry a little bit about PJ and Derek having like big games, right? Because every so often you need one of those guys to go off for 20, right? Or something like that. Or between them they go for 25 or something, right? And I really think that they're going to, I don't want to say struggle offensively this series, but I think they're going to have maybe a little bit of a quiet series. I really think they're going to try to keep those guys limited on the threes. And we'll see what happens. The alley-oops are going to have to be big for Dallas, mainly because it will signify attacking the rim. And look, if one thing about attacking the rim too and getting layups or short shots is it also prevents the fast break, right? And I think that's big for Dallas. And one of the times why I think they're so good is their defense really has become a lot better with PJ and Derek funneling to the big guys down low, and Kyrie and Luka are no slouches on defense either. Kyrie more so. That I think they can switch too, and they attack the rim a lot. A lot of alley-oops. Luka loves to go to the hole. So does Kyrie at times. And I think that's really been hard at times. Mavs can really put the clamps on people. And, also they're constantly attacking the rim. And they love to throw those big guys in there. And they do a lot of good work that I think people don't understand, that getting a dunk, right, prevents the leak out, or even a miss keeps the ball around the rim. Mavericks are a good offensive rebounding team, right? Keeps the ball around the rim. It prevents things like a fast break, right? And I think Boston is going to want to get out and run in this series as much as possible, right? I think that they see Gafford or Lively in the half court probably is more of an issue than if they can get out and run, right? So I say that I'm a little worried PJ and Derek, I think they're going to have to hit some threes at a high clip, I think, to be effective, because I think they're going to try and keep those guys away from the rim. And so that makes me worry about Boston getting into fast break scenarios, but we'll see how that plays out, right? I am confident. I think the Mavs are good matchups. I think they're going to win in 5 or 6. I almost want to say sweep, but I'll have some respect, right? But I think the Mavs win the series. I really do. I feel like the attitude of playing like you have nothing to lose may be the difference. And I think Luka, you know what I mean? It's just there's a little bit of this feeling with Boston that they are going to lose, right? I feel like I can feel that from them, right? I know that feeling, right? I know that feeling. And it doesn't feel like that with the Mavs. I feel like they are loose, like they're relaxed, they are ready for the moment, right? And that's ultimately the difference for me, I think, right? So we'll see how it plays out. Games tomorrow. I might live stream it. We'll see. But that's my video. Hope you guys liked it. Kept it under an hour. So see you guys on the next one.